Ethan Grant stood silently at the edge of the camp, his eyes fixed on the distant horizon of the African jungle. The vast wilderness before him was an enigmatic blend of breathtaking beauty and lurking danger, thick vegetation, oppressive humidity, and secrets hidden in every shadow. But for Ethan, this place was far more than a scientific expedition or a physical test. It was the home of Kivo, a gorilla he had raised with unwavering love and care during the animal's formative years. To Ethan, Kivo was not just another creature. He was a significant chapter in his life story, a reflection of his soul. Raised in England, Kivo had been more than just an animal under Ethan's care. He was like a son. As a young gorilla, Kivo relied entirely on Ethan, seeking comfort, protection, and affection, even on the most challenging days. However, 5 years ago, Ethan had made the heartbreaking decision to return Kivo to the wild, believing the jungle was where he truly belonged. Their farewell had been filled with tears and hope, and ever since, Ethan had wondered how Kivo had adapted to his natural home. Now, after half a decade, Ethan had returned, fulfilling a promise he made to himself to see how Kivo was doing. But with that promise came an overwhelming wave of doubt. Would Kivo still remember him, or had the wild transformed him into an unrecognizable creature? These questions gnawed at Ethan's mind as he adjusted his backpack, preparing to step into the dense forest. The towering trees formed a thick canopy overhead, filtering sunlight into faint golden streaks. Every rustle in the foliage felt like a mystery. Was it just the wind, or was something watching them? The damp, earthy scent mingled with the fragrance of wildflowers, creating an almost intoxicating atmosphere. To most, the jungle was an intimidating, chaotic maze, but for Ethan, it was a place of reunion. Yet his heart remained heavy with anticipation and uncertainty. What if Kivo no longer trusted him? What if the once gentle gorilla now saw him as a threat, an intruder in his territory? Ethan knew that even the most peaceful creatures could become aggressive when protecting their domain. But despite the doubts, he clung to the memory of Kivo's curious eyes, which had once looked at him with unwavering trust. "Does he still trust me?" Ethan whispered to himself, a mix of hope and fear clouding his thoughts. Deep down, Ethan knew this journey was not just about finding Kivo. It was about rediscovering a part of himself he had left behind in the jungle 5 years ago. Every step he took into the wilderness brought him closer to the answers he sought. Not just about Kivo, but about final preparations. Heavy backpacks, radios, medical kits, and supplies were being carefully checked. Every detail mattered in an environment where one mistake could mean disaster. The guides, seasoned men who knew the jungle's secrets, huddled over worn-out maps, discussing the best route forward. Ethan listened half-heartedly, his mind already deep in thought. Absent-mindedly, he ran his fingers over the brim of his hat, an old habit whenever anxiety gripped him. "We're ready, Mr. Grant," one of the guides announced, breaking his trance. Ethan nodded firmly, shouldered his backpack, and adjusted the straps. There was no turning back now. "Let's find him," he said with quiet determination. The group stepped into the jungle. The air was thick with humidity, and every step felt heavier as the heat pressed down on them. The uneven terrain, tangled roots, and slippery ground demanded constant attention. Hitting the dense undergrowth, one of the guides suddenly halted. "Here," he said, pointing to a patch of muddy ground. Ethan stepped closer and saw them. Gorilla tracks. Fresh, deep imprints marked the earth. Crouching down, Ethan traced the outline of the footprints with his fingers, as if the simple touch could bridge the distance between them. "It could be him," he murmured, barely above a whisper. The air felt heavier, and a charged silence fell over the group. Ethan's heartbeat quickened as the reality of being close to Kivo began to sink in. But he couldn't let emotions cloud his focus. With determination etched on his face, he prepared to take the next steps forward, toward the gorilla. Ethan Grant pressed forward, every step carrying the weight of a promise. Not just to Kivo, but to himself. This wasn't merely an expedition, it was a deeply personal mission. Behind him, his team followed closely, their trust in his leadership evident in their steady movements. Every choice Ethan made could alter the outcome of their journey. "We'll follow these tracks," he said with quiet determination. The guides nodded, and the group resumed their trek, driven by a mix of hope and lingering uncertainty. The jungle seemed both alive and menacing, its vibrant beauty intertwined with relentless challenges. Progress was slow. The thick vegetation seemed to conspire against them, vines and branches forming barriers at every turn. Low-hanging branches scratched their arms, while tangled roots threatened to trip their tired feet. Ethan, carrying his heavy backpack, his face slick with sweat, led the way with unwavering focus. Each swing of his machete felt heavier than the last, as though the forest itself was testing his determination. Clouds of mosquitoes swarmed around them, their bites relentless despite the repellents. Ethan swatted at his neck and muttered under his breath, "If this were easy, it wouldn't be the jungle." Time dragged on, and exhaustion crept into their bones. Shoulders drooped under the weight of backpacks, and every breath felt labored in the suffocating humidity. Ethan could see the weariness in his team's faces, but he knew stopping was not an option. The jungle didn't wait, and danger lurked in every delay. Then, just past midday, something unexpected happened. As they emerged into a clearing near a slow-moving river, Ethan froze. A low, rhythmic sound caught his attention. He raised his hand, signaling silence. There, at the water's edge, stood a herd of elephants. Their massive bodies moved with surprising grace, trunks swaying gently as they drank from the river. The guides whispered a warning. They seemed calm, but if startled, they could charge. Observed them in silence, captivated by their majesty. It was a rare, almost sacred moment, a reminder that the jungle was not just harsh and unforgiving, but also filled with profound beauty. After several minutes, the elephants disappeared into the dense vegetation, leaving behind a sense of peace and renewed hope. But the jungle offers little respite. Later that afternoon, while navigating a damp, swampy area, a sharp scream cut through the air. One of the team members collapsed, clutching his ankle. Ethan and the others rushed to him, and their worst fear was confirmed: a venomous snake bite. Panic rippled through the group, but Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "Stay calm," he said firmly. Using the radio, Ethan called for immediate assistance while one of the guides applied a makeshift tourniquet to slow the venom's spread. Around them, the jungle seemed to tighten, it determined than ever. The jungle was unforgiving, but Ethan knew that every hardship was a step closer to Kivo. His senses remained sharp, his eyes scanning the dense underbrush for any sign of the gorilla he had come so far to see. Then it happened. A deep, resonant growl echoed through the forest, freezing everyone in place. Ethan's heart clenched. It was a sound he knew all too well, one that stirred a mix of fear, hope, and longing deep in his chest. "Kevo," he whispered, almost involuntarily. The team stood still, watching Ethan with bated breath. Every leaf seemed frozen, every sound muted except for the distant growl. Slowly, cautiously, Ethan stepped forward, his eyes locked on the shadows ahead. Each step felt like a bridge between past and present, a connection spanning 5 long years. The jungle seemed to hold its breath as Ethan moved closer to the source of the sound, his heart pounding with anticipation. Ethan moved cautiously, every step deliberate, as if afraid to shatter the fragile moment he had been waiting for. The dense vegetation parted, revealing a scene that took his breath away. There, by the edge of a small river, stood Kevo. He was larger now, more powerful, his broad shoulders and muscular chest reflecting years of survival and adaptation in the wild. Kevo's presence was commanding, his figure blending seamlessly with the jungle around him. For a moment, Ethan was frozen in awe. Kevo stood like a king in his domain, every bit a master of his world. But then their eyes met. Deep, dark eyes locked onto Ethan's, and time seemed to halt. Ethan felt his heart pounding, his palms damp with sweat. Would Kevo remember him, or would he see him as an intruder, a threat to his territory? Ethan swallowed hard, steadying his voice as he spoke softly. "Kevo, That single word carried the weight of years, memories, emotions, and a bond Ethan wasn't sure had survived time and distance. Kivo tilted his head slightly, his deep-set eyes narrowing in what seemed like recognition. Ethan took a cautious step forward, ensuring his movements were slow and non-threatening. Kivo remained still, his gaze fixed on Ethan, the tension in the air almost tangible. "It's me, Ethan," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Slowly, Ethan knelt down, lowering himself to appear as harmless as possible. The jungle went silent except for the faint murmur of the river behind them. Then, Kivo moved, were slow and non-threatening. Kivo remained still, his gaze fixed on Ethan, the tension in the air almost tangible. "It's me, Ethan," he whispered, his voice trembling with emotion. Slowly, Ethan knelt down, lowering himself to appear as harmless as possible. The jungle went silent except for the faint murmur of the river behind them. Then, Kivo moved, one step, then another. His cautious approach carried a sense of curiosity, but something flickered in his eyes, a glimmer of memory. Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the massive gorilla stopped just a few feet away. For a brief moment, everything hung in the balance. Then Kivo let out a deep, resonant cry that echoed through the jungle, startling nearby birds into flight. Ethan flinched, closing his eyes, bracing for something. But instead of aggression, he felt a gentle gorilla stopped just a few feet away. For a brief moment, everything hung in the balance. Then Kivo let out a deep, resonant cry that echoed through the jungle, startling nearby birds into flight. Ethan flinched, closing his eyes, bracing for something. But instead of aggression, he felt a gentle pressure on his shoulder. Slowly opening his eyes, Ethan saw Kivo's massive hand resting on him, his face softened by an expression Ethan could only describe as recognition. "You remember me?" Ethan said, his voice breaking with emotion. Tears welled up in his eyes as he slowly rose to his feet. Kivo let out a low, soothing sound, almost like a purr, and then, with surprising tenderness, he pulled Ethan into an embrace. The sheer strength and warmth of the gorilla's arms made Ethan's breath hitch. Relief, joy, and an overwhelming sense of love washed over him. Joy and an overwhelming sense of love washed over him. Ethan gently ran his hand over Kivo's back, whispering softly, as though trying to bridge the gap of the years they had been apart. For that brief, perfect moment, nothing else mattered. Not the dangers of the jungle, not the exhausting journey, not the uncertainty that had plagued Ethan's thoughts. It was just the two of them, man and gorilla, reunited in a bond that time and distance had failed to break. The rest of the team, who had stood frozen in anticipation, finally relaxed. Some even wiped tears from their eyes, deeply moved by the extraordinary reunion unfolding before them. It was a moment none of them would ever forget, a testament to the enduring power of love and trust. Kevo stepped back slightly, his deep eyes searching Ethan's face as if trying to convey something unspoken. Then, with a slight turn of his head, he glanced toward the enduring power of love and trust. Kevo stepped back slightly, his deep eyes searching Ethan's face as if trying to convey something unspoken. Then, with a slight turn of his head, he glanced toward the dense vegetation behind him. As if answering a silent command, figures began to emerge from the jungle shadows. First came an adult female gorilla, her presence both commanding and gentle. Behind her, another female stepped into view, followed closely by three young gorillas, their wide eyes filled with curiosity. The little ones peeked from behind the adults, sometimes venturing a step forward before retreating shyly. Ethan's heart swelled with awe as he took in the sight before him. Kivo, the young gorilla he had once cared for and released into the wild, was now not only a survivor but a leader, a protector, and a father. Kivo turned to Ethan and gave a small nod, as if to say, "This is my family." Ethan's chest tightened, almost human. When one of the young ones wandered too far, Kivo let out a low, rumbling sound, and the little one quickly scampered back to the safety of the females. It was clear that Kivo was not just surviving in the wild, he was thriving. Ethan had left him here 5 years ago, unsure of what the future would hold. Now, as he stood amidst Kivo's family, he realized that their bond had not only survived but had grown into something even more profi. The dynamic within Kevo's family was mesmerizing. Each movement, each glance, carried meaning. The adult females kept the young ones close, their protective instincts always on alert, yet they frequently glanced at Kevo, seeking his silent approval before making any move. It was like watching an unspoken symphony of respect, protection, and trust. Ethan observed this dynamic with awe, realizing how every gesture and sound. He couldn't help but reflect on his time with Kevo when the gorilla was just a young orphan. Back then, Ethan had cared for him, played with him, and built a bond that transcended species. Now Kevo was mirroring those same gestures with his own family, passing on the love and trust Ethan had once given him. It felt like an invisible legacy, a bridge between their worlds. The afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the canopy, and Ethan allowed himself to simply exist in the moment. One of the young gorillas, full of curiosity, edged closer to him. Its wide eyes studied him before a tiny hand reached out to touch his leg. Startled by its own courage, the young gorilla quickly scurried back to the safety of the females. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Kevo observed the interaction with calm authority, his deep eyes holding a silent message. I trust you, but remember, I'm watching. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. He looked at Kevo and said softly, You've done an incredible job here, my friend. Kevo responded with a gentle touch on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement and connection. In that instant, Ethan didn't just see a gorilla leader or a wild family. He saw a symbol of strength, unity, and life at its purest. But the jungle rarely allowed peace to linger for long. The warm tranquility of the afternoon was suddenly interrupted by an unsettling shift in the air. Dark clouds gathered rapidly overhead, and a chill crept into the humid warmth. The breeze turned into sharp gusts of wind, carrying the sharp scent of rain. The distant rumble of thunder followed, like a warning drumbeat echoing through the trees. The guides exchanged uneasy glances, and Ethan felt the weight of the moment. Mesmerizing. Each movement, each glance, carried meaning. The adult females kept the young ones close, their protective instincts always on alert, yet they frequently glanced at Kevo, seeking his silent approval before making any move. It was like watching an unspoken symphony of respect, protection, and trust. Ethan observed this dynamic with awe, realizing how every gesture and sound played a role in their connection as a family unit. As he sat on a nearby log, emotions washed over him. He couldn't help but reflect on his time with Kevo when the gorilla was just a young orphan. Back then, Ethan had cared for him, played with him, and built a bond that transcended species. Now, Kevo was mirroring those same gestures with his own family, passing on the love and trust Ethan had once given him. It felt like an invisible legacy, a bridge between their worlds. The afternoon sun. Ethan had cared for him, played with him, and built a bond that transcended species. Now, Kevo was mirroring those same gestures with his own family, passing on the love and trust Ethan had once given him. It felt like an invisible legacy, a bridge between their worlds. The afternoon sun cast golden streaks through the canopy, and Ethan allowed himself to simply exist in the moment. One of the young gorillas, full of curiosity, edged closer to him. Its wide eyes studied him before a tiny hand reached out to touch his leg. Startled by its own courage, the young gorilla quickly scurried back to the safety of the females. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Kevo observed the interaction with calm authority, his deep eyes holding a silent message. I trust you, but remember, I'm watching. That day wasn't just a reunion for Ethan. It was a profound lesson about the power of bonds, trust, and shared love. Females. Ethan couldn't help but smile. Kevo observed the interaction with calm authority, his deep eyes holding a silent message. I trust you, but remember, I'm watching. That day wasn't just a reunion for Ethan. It was a profound lesson about the power of bonds, trust, and shared love. In Kivo and his family, Ethan saw a reflection of life's deepest truths, caring for one another, even in the face of immense challenges. As the sun dipped lower on the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Ethan felt a deep sense of gratitude. He looked at Kivo and said softly, "You've done an incredible job here, my friend." Kivo responded with a gentle touch on Ethan's shoulder, a gesture of acknowledgement and connection. In that instant, Ethan didn't just see a guerrilla leader or a wild family. He saw a symbol of strength, unity, and life at its purest. And Ethan felt the weight of the moment. The jungle, already a place of constant challenge, became far more dangerous during a storm. As the sun slowly set over the jungle, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, Ethan realized that the moment he had been dreading since the beginning of the expedition had finally arrived. After spending so many days sharing unforgettable moments with Kevu and his family, it was time to say goodbye. Ethan looked around, taking in the scene that had become so familiar, yet remained extraordinary in its beauty. The jungle buzzed with life, but for Ethan, the most meaningful sound was Kevu's gentle grunts and the quiet movements of his family. The team was busy packing their equipment, preparing for the journey back to camp, but Ethan stood still. Kevu sat a few meters away, surrounded by his young ones, observing Ethan with calm, deep eyes that seemed to understand something was different. Life followed an uninterrupted rhythm. But for Ethan, this moment felt like a break in that rhythm, something he wished he could avoid, but knew was inevitable. "Hey, my friend," Ethan said softly as he approached Kevu. His voice was steady but heavy with emotion. Kevu turned his head, his eyes filled with a mix of curiosity and what Ethan interpreted as understanding. Kneeling down to meet Kevu's gaze, Ethan said, "I have to go now, but I promise I'll be back. You'll always be a part of me." Kevu remained still for a moment, as if processing Ethan's words or absorbing the energy of the moment. Then, slowly, Kevu extended his massive hand and gently touched Ethan's shoulder. It was a simple, yet profoundly meaningful gesture. Ethan felt tears well up in his eyes, but fought to hold them back. Kevu's family watched her, Ethan said softly, glancing at Kevu one last time. Finally, he stood up, knowing that lingering would only make leaving more difficult. Kevu watched him intently as Ethan began to walk away. Each step felt as though he was leaving a piece of himself behind. When Ethan reached the riverbank, he paused and turned around. Kevu stood there with his family, but his eyes remained locked on Ethan. "See you soon, my friend," Ethan said, raising his hand in farewell. His voice was thick with emotion, but he managed a faint smile. Kevu let out a low sound, a deep, mournful call that echoed through the jungle. To Ethan, that sound was both a goodbye and a promise, a reminder that their bond would remain unbroken despite the distance. As the boat drifted away, Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Kevu. The gorilla's figure seemed to merge with the jungle, becoming an inseparable part of it. To Ethan, that sound was both a goodbye and a promise, a reminder that their bond would remain unbroken despite the distance. As the boat drifted away, Ethan couldn't take his eyes off Kevu. The gorilla's figure seemed to merge with the jungle, becoming an inseparable part of the landscape. Ethan knew he was leaving something behind, yet he felt a deep certainty that he would return. As the sounds of the jungle faded into the distance, he realized this journey had left a mark on him in a way few experiences ever could. But this reunion with Kevu wasn't just about a special bond. It was a reminder of how the connection between living beings can transcend time, space, and barriers. What did you think of this heartfelt story? Leave a comment below and share your thoughts with us. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you never miss an update. See you in the next story!